Welcome to the Cheating Wife Stories channel. Brendan King surveyed the Bayview skyline from his corner office at King Engineering Solutions. At 42, he had built his specialized engineering firm from a one-man operation in his garage into a $30 million company with government and military contracts. Not bad for a kid from Chapel Falls, whose father worked at the steel mill until it closed, leaving the family struggling. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. King, your 2 o'clock is here," said Sophie Rivera, his executive assistant of 5 years. "Send them in, Sophie. And can you make sure the Kendricks proposal is ready for tomorrow?" "Already done," she replied with quiet efficiency. Brendan smiled. Sophie was the backbone of his operation. Loyal, sharp, and anticipating his needs before he voiced them. Unlike his wife of 8 years, who seemed to anticipate only how to spend his money. The meeting with the Defense Department representatives went well, securing a new contract that would keep King Engineering profitable for years. Brendan should have been elated, but the victory felt hollow. He checked his watch. 7:30 p.m. Elena would be at another charity gala by now. Networking, as she called it. His phone buzzed with a text from her. "Don't wait up. Dinner with the Stantons and the foundation board." The Stantons again. Jeremy Stanton was old money, and his son Eric had recently taken an interest in Elena's Youth Literacy Foundation. Too much interest, Brendan suspected. "Working late again?" Sophie asked, coat in hand, ready to leave. "Just wrapping up. Big win today." "Congratulations," she said, her warm brown eyes showing genuine happiness for his success. "You deserve it." After Sophie left, Brendan's phone rang. It was his sister, Marina. "Hey, Rena. What's up?" "Just checking in. Heard through the grapevine that Elena's at another gala with that Stanton crowd." Brendan sighed. "The Youth Literacy Foundation Board." "Right?" Marina said skeptically. "Brendan, I've never interfered in your marriage. But then don't start now." He cut her off, more sharply than intended. "Fine. Just remember what Dad always said. Trust must be earned. Betrayal is never forgiven." Brendan finished the call, reminded of their father's mantra, drilled into them after their mother abandoned the family for her chiropractor. Later, driving his electric sedan through the fog-shrouded streets to their Coastal Heights home, Brendan reflected on his life. He had everything: successful business, beautiful home, attractive wife. So why did everything feel so empty? The house was dark when he arrived. In the kitchen, he found a bottle of expensive bourbon, a gift from a contractor, and poured 2 fingers. Tomorrow was their anniversary, and he planned a surprise trip to Coral Cay. Maybe that would rekindle whatever they'd lost. As he headed upstairs, his phone chimed with an email alert, a notification from his bank. Withdrawal confirmation. $50,000 to Chambers Holdings, Elena's father's company. The failing company Brendan had previously refused to bail out. He frowned. That withdrawal would require Elena's signature. Strange. She hadn't mentioned moving such a large sum. Just the first crack in the foundation of the life he thought he'd built. Brendan awoke alone the next morning. Elena's side of the bed was undisturbed. He checked his phone. No messages. Unusual, even for her late nights. He showered and headed to his home office to finalize details for their anniversary trip. Elena's laptop sat open on the coffee table in the adjoining sitting room. He needed their confirmation numbers, which she'd emailed to herself. As Brendan moved the mouse to wake the computer, a notification popped up from Clearwater Law Partners. Subject: Divorce Strategy, Asset Division. Brendan froze, mind racing even as his body remained still. A mistake. Must be a mistake. He clicked the email. "Dear Mrs. King, per our discussion, I recommend filing before your husband discovers the affairs. Barclay is an at-fault state, and if he files with evidence of infidelity, it would impact Asset Division. As discussed, our strategy to secure the business interests, property holdings, and retirement accounts relies on filing first and establishing financial need. Your husband's long work hours and emotional neglect provide additional leverage. Brendan's hand trembled as he scrolled down. I want to take his business, house, and retirement before he discovers the affairs. Is that possible? Elena had written. The attorney's response was calculated, with proper strategy and timing, absolutely. White-hot anger flashed through Brendan's body. He took a deep breath, suppressing the urge to throw the laptop across the room. Instead, he methodically began searching through her emails. What he found destroyed any doubt. Messages between Elena and Eric Stanton dating back 18 months. Hotel receipts, intimate photos, plans for their future together once Eric's investment opportunity paid off with money from Brendan's accounts. There were others too. A tennis instructor last summer, a chance encounter with an ex-boyfriend during a girl's trip to Vegas. Most damning were messages to her father, Rodney Chambers. Daddy, the plan is working. Brendan suspects nothing. Once I file for divorce, I'll control enough of his assets to save your company. Eric said as once he gets the King Engineering insider information to his investors, we'll be set for life. Brendan sat back, ice replacing the fire in his veins. He'd been a fool. The withdrawals, the late nights, the sudden interest in his business contracts. It all made sense now. He forwarded everything to his personal email, then carefully returned the laptop to exactly where he'd found it. He called his attorney, Russell Fox. Russell, I need to see you today. Don't talk to anyone about this meeting. 3 hours later, Brendan sat in Russell's office, watching his old college friend review the emails. Jesus Christ, Brendan, Russell finally said, removing his glasses. I've seen ugly divorces, but this level of calculation. I need options. Legally. File first with this evidence. Protect your assets immediately. But given what they're planning. Russell hesitated. What? Brendan pressed. They're not just coming after your money, Brendan. They're targeting your business using insider information. That's criminal. We should talk to the FBI. Brendan shook his head. Not yet. I need to know how deep this goes first. What are you thinking? Brendan's expression hardened. I'm thinking it's time to remember everything my father taught me about dealing with betrayal. 3 steps, Brendan told Russell over breakfast at an out-of-the-way diner the next morning. Secure, prepare, disappear. Russell looked skeptical. And Elena won't notice. She thinks I'm planning our anniversary trip. Meanwhile, I'll be planning something very different. Step 1 began that afternoon. Brendan opened new accounts at banks where they had no history. He transferred majority shareholdings in King Engineering to a trust controlled by his sister, Marina, who, as a federal judge, was beyond reproach. He moved retirement funds into protected accounts that couldn't be touched in a divorce. Is this legal? Sophie asked when Brendan had her prepare documentation for transferring company intellectual property to a new holding corporation. Completely, Brendan assured her. I'm simply restructuring for tax purposes. The white lie was necessary to protect her. At home, Brendan maintained the facade. He confirmed their anniversary dinner reservations, wrapped the diamond bracelet he bought months ago, and smiled when Elena returned from foundation meetings with no trace of Eric's cologne lingering on her clothes. Step 2 was evidence. Brendan hired a private investigator who documented Elena meeting Eric at an upscale hotel. He installed small cameras in their home office and bedroom while Elena was at yoga. Within days, he had recordings of Elena discussing divorce strategy on the phone with both her father and Eric. Brendan's clueless. She laughed to Eric during one call. He's so wrapped up in his precious business, he hasn't even noticed the money I've been moving. By the time he figures it out, we'll own half his company. The final betrayal came when Brendan discovered Elena had photographed confidential contract specifications from his home office and sent them to Eric, who was using the inside information for investment purposes. The night before their anniversary, Brendan implemented Step 3. He informed Elena he needed to fly to New Dover for an emergency meeting with a military contractor. But our anniversary, she protested with well-practiced disappointment. I know. I'm sorry. I'll make it up to you, he promised, watching her eyes flicker with secret relief. She already had plans with Eric, he knew. Instead of flying to New Dover, Brendan drove to a remote lake house owned through a shell company that didn't appear in his financial records. Only Marina knew of its existence. Before disappearing, Brendan sent everything, emails, photos, recordings, financial records, to Russell with instructions to file for divorce in Barclay the moment Elena made her move. He called Sophie from a burner phone. "I'll be unreachable for a few days. If anyone asks, I'm at that military contractor meeting in New Dover. Is everything okay?" Genuine concern filled her voice. "Not yet," Brendan replied. "But it will be." As moonlight reflected off the still lake, Brendan raised a glass to the memory of his father. The old man had been right all along. Trust must be earned, and betrayal is never forgiven. The real war was just beginning. The morning after their anniversary, Elena King woke with a start. She reached for her phone and saw 3 missed calls from her father. She quickly dialed him back. "Have you filed yet?" Rodney Chambers demanded without greeting. "Hello to you too, Daddy," Elena sighed, sliding out of bed. "No, not yet. Clearwater says timing is crucial. You're running out of time. Eric's investors are getting impatient." Elena caught her reflection in the vanity mirror, still beautiful at 38, thanks to the expensive treatments Brendan's money provided. "Everything's under control. Brendan's in New Dover for at least 2 days. I've already transferred enough to keep your creditors at bay." After ending the call, Elena showered and prepared for her day. She had a meeting with her attorney, then lunch with Eric. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Until it wasn't. At the bank, the manager's expression was apologetic but firm. "I'm sorry, Mrs. King, but these accounts require dual authorization for withdrawals now." "That's impossible," Elena insisted. "I've been making withdrawals for years." "The change was made yesterday, Mrs. King, by your husband." Panic fluttered in her chest. She tried another account, same result. She called her father. "He knows," Rodney said gravely. "You need to file today." At Clearwater Law Partners, more bad news awaited. Their petition for divorce couldn't be filed because Brendan King had already filed in Barclay, where they'd been married. "How is that possible?" Elena demanded. "He's in New Dover." The attorney pulled up the filing on his computer. "This was submitted electronically yesterday afternoon. It cites irreconcilable differences and infidelity." The blood drained from Elena's face. "What evidence?" The attorney looked uncomfortable. "Substantial evidence, Mrs. King. Emails, photographs, recordings." "Recordings?" Her voice rose to a shriek. "Of conversations with Mr. Stanton and your father regarding financial matters and intimate relations." Her phone rang. "Eric, we have a problem," he said without preamble. "Those contract specs you gave me, they're fakes." Elena felt the floor tilt beneath her. "What? Fake information?" "The investors are pulling out. But that's not the worst part. Someone's been monitoring my communications about King Engineering." By evening, Elena had discovered the extent of Brendan's counterattack. Joint credit cards canceled. Home security codes changed. Access to his office revoked. When she finally reached him on his cell, his voice was cold. "Enjoy the house for now, Elena. I'm sure you and Eric will be very happy there, until the courts sort things out. Brendan, please, this is all a misunderstanding. 3 steps ahead, Elena. That's what my father taught me. Always stay 3 steps ahead of those who would betray you." The line went dead, leaving Elena alone in the home that suddenly felt like a beautiful empty cage. Miles away, in his lakeside sanctuary, Brendan watched the sunset with a tumbler of bourbon. His phone buzzed with a text from Russell. She tried to file. Too late. For the first time in days, Brendan smiled. The game had only just begun. "We need to destroy him," Elena declared, pacing Eric Stanton's penthouse the next morning. "He's made fools of us." Eric Stanton, with his angular features and tailored suit, projected confidence despite the panic in his eyes. At 45, he had the Stanton name but none of the business acumen. He'd squandered his trust fund on failed ventures, counting on Alina to deliver King Engineering's profitable government contracts to save him. "My contacts at the Times owe me a favor," Eric said. "We can plant stories about King Engineering's business practices." "Not enough," Rodney Chambers interrupted, his bulky frame dominating the doorway. A failed businessman clinging to past glory, Rodney had pushed Alina into marrying Brendan years ago, seeing him as a meal ticket. "We need to hit him where it hurts, his reputation with the military. I still have friends at the Pentagon." By week's end, their campaign was underway. A business reporter contacted King Engineering about allegations of contract irregularities. A Defense Department procurement officer called about concerns regarding fulfillment capabilities. Social media buzzed with anonymous hints about the company's financial stability. Sophie brought the clippings to Brendan at the lake house. "They're trying to tank the company," she said, concern etching her features. "Expected," Brendan replied, scanning the articles. "How's morale?" "Shaky. 3 engineers have already jumped ship. The Phillips contract is on hold pending an investigation." Brendan nodded, and Alina moved most of her things to Eric's penthouse. "She tried to access your home office, but the locks have been changed." "Good," Brendan said, though the confirmation of her betrayal still stung. "What about the plan?" Sophie handed him another folder. "Everything's ready. Russell filed the injunction this morning." Before their campaign could gain momentum, Alina and Eric were served with cease and desist orders regarding any discussion of King Engineering's business practices or contracts. Russell's injunction cited malicious intent to damage business relationships. When that failed to stop them, Brendan released selected recordings to key military contacts, evidence that Eric had attempted to use stolen contract information for personal gain. Overnight, Eric Stanton became radioactive in defense circles. Desperate, Alina approached Marina King at her courthouse. "Please, Marina," she pleaded. "This has gone too far. Just tell me where Brendan is so we can talk." Marina's judicial reserve never wavered. 8 years you've been my sister-in-law, and I never once heard you express genuine interest in my brother's whereabouts. Only his assets. That's not fair. What's not fair is watching you plot to destroy someone who gave you everything." Marina cut her off. "My father abandoned us." "Did Brendan ever tell you that? Left us with nothing but debts and broken promises. Brendan worked 3 jobs to help put me through law school. He built something from nothing, and you thought you could just take it." Alina's eyes narrowed. "He'll lose everything fighting me. Tell him that." "He already lost what mattered when you betrayed him," Marina replied. "Everything else is just property." As Alina stormed off, Marina texted Brendan. "She came to me. Exactly as you predicted. The board meeting at King Engineering was tense. Several directors suggested selling to a competitor before the damage spread." "Where is Brendan?" demanded Roland Fletcher, the senior board member. "His absence during this crisis is unacceptable." The door opened, and Brendan King entered, immaculately dressed in a charcoal suit. "Gentlemen, I apologize for my absence. Family matters required my attention." His calm authority silenced the room. "Now about these rumors." For the next hour, Brendan systematically addressed each concern, revealing contingency contracts and strategic partnerships that would keep the company stable regardless of the current turbulence. "The Phillips contract," Fletcher pressed, "will be reinstated by Friday," Brendan assured him. "The allegations have been traced to their source and discredited." After the meeting, Sophie handed Brendan a folder. Eric Stanton's financial records as requested. Inside was the evidence Brendan needed. Eric had used the fake contract information to secure high-interest loans from questionable sources. When the information proved worthless, those lenders would come calling. Brendan smiled grimly. The noose was tightening. 3 weeks into his calculated disappearance from home, Brendan felt the strain of his double life. By day, he maintained King Engineering's stability against Alina and Eric's attacks. By night, he retreated to the lake house, planning his next moves with Russell and Sophie. The company had weathered the worst of the storm, but not without casualties. The Phillips contract remained suspended, 2 smaller clients had pulled out entirely, and the stock had dropped 17%. The board's getting nervous, Sophie reported during their daily briefing at a discreet coffee shop. Fletcher's talking about a vote of no confidence. Brendan rubbed his temples. The preliminary hearing is in 2 weeks. Russell thinks we can expedite after that. Can the company hold that long? Before he could answer, his phone rang. Russell Fox. Judge Barker just issued a temporary freeze on all marital assets, Russell said without preamble. Including your company shares. How? Brendan demanded. We transfer it. They're claiming fraudulent conveyance, arguing you moved assets in anticipation of divorce. Brendan's jaw tightened. Options. We fight it, but it'll take time. Meanwhile, you're effectively locked out of your own company's decision-making. After hanging up, Brendan stared at his cooling coffee. Alina's attorney is better than we thought. Sophie hesitated, then reached for his hand. Maybe it's time to settle. Save what you can, and rebuild. No, Brendan said firmly. My father rebuilt once, then watched another man take everything he'd worked for. I won't do the same. That night, in his sparse lake house, Brendan drank bourbon directly from the bottle, an uncharacteristic lapse in control. His phone buzzed with a text from Marina. Fletcher called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow. They're voting on interim leadership. Brendan hurled the bottle against the wall, watching it shatter. Everything he'd built was slipping away while Alina and Eric celebrated their victory. A knock at the door startled him. Nobody knew this location except Marina. Sophie stood on the porch, rain dripping from her coat. I followed Marina, she admitted. We need to talk. Inside, she laid out papers on the kitchen table. During the audit, I found something. Eric Stanton has been quietly buying King Engineering stock through shell companies. Combined with what Alina might control after the asset freeze, they could take majority control. Brendan's strategic mind clicked into gear. That was their plan all along, not just divorce, but a hostile takeover. There's more, Sophie said. The fake contract information you planted. Eric used it to secure funding from Mikhail Novikov. Brendan whistled softly. Novikov was notorious in international finance, a Russian oligarch who didn't tolerate financial disappointments. Novikov's representatives have been calling Eric's office daily, Sophie continued. He's desperate for cash. So desperate he might make a mistake, Brendan mused. The next morning, Brendan attended the emergency board meeting, stunning everyone with his appearance. Gentlemen, I understand your concerns, he addressed the shocked directors. My personal situation has created complications. However, before you vote, you should know King Engineering has just secured an exclusive contract with the Naval Systems Command. $30 million over 5 years. He slid folders to each board member. Inside was confirmation of the contract, legitimate this time, that Brendan had been quietly negotiating for months. I suggest we table the leadership discussion until next quarter, when this contract begins generating revenue. The vote of no confidence was postponed. Brendan had bought himself time, but he knew it was temporary. Outside the boardroom, he confronted Roland Fletcher. You've been talking to Eric Stanton. Fletcher flinched. He made a compelling offer for the company, or just for you. Business is business, Brendan. Nothing personal. Brendan stepped closer. My father taught me business is always personal. Remember that when this is over. Back at the lake house, Brendan called Russell. I need everything on Novikov's American operations, and I want Eric Stanton under surveillance 24/7. Russell sounded worried. Brendan, you're entering dangerous territory. They crossed that line first, Brendan replied. Now they'll learn the price of betrayal. As he hung up, Brendan felt a cold clarity replace his earlier despair. He'd been playing defense. Time to attack. It's perfect, Brendan said, examining the fabricated military contract documents Sophie had prepared. The King Engineering letterhead looked authentic, as did the Pentagon classification markings. Are you sure about this? Sophie asked, unease evident in her voice. If they discover it's fake, they won't look too closely, Brendan assured her. They'll see what they want to see, a lifeline. Operation Judas, Brendan called it privately. The perfect bait for a desperate man. Sophie planted the documents where Elena's private investigator, whom Russell had identified weeks ago, would find them during routine surveillance of King Engineering. Additionally, Brendan had Marina mention the classified project in a phone call she knew was being monitored. The trap was set. Now they waited. 48 hours later, Eric Stanton contacted Novikov's representatives with guaranteed inside information about an imminent King Engineering contract that would triple the company's value. Novikov, still angry about the previous failed intelligence, demanded verification. Eric provided copies of the planted documents and assured Novikov the information was solid. Novikov extended Eric a $20 million line of credit, secured against Eric's remaining properties and his promised shares in King Engineering. Meanwhile, Brendan initiated Phase 2, Reconciliation Theater. He called Elena. I think we should talk, he said, keeping his tone neutral. This has gone too far. The company's suffering. Let's find a settlement that works for everyone. Now you want to talk. Elena's voice dripped with suspicion. After destroying my life, I want to end this war before we both lose everything, Brendan replied. Let's meet. The meeting was arranged at a neutral location, an upscale restaurant's private dining room. Russell advised against it, but Brendan was adamant. She needs to see my face when it happens. The night before the meeting, Russell called with news. Federal agents contacted me about King Engineering contracts being shopped to foreign investors. They want to talk to you. Stall them for 48 hours, Brendan instructed. Then I'll tell them everything. What exactly are you planning, Brendan? Justice, he replied simply. That same evening, Eric Stanton received an alarming call from his broker. King Engineering stock was plummeting on rumors of contract irregularities. Eric immediately tried transferring Novikov's funds to cover his positions, but the transactions were mysteriously delayed. Panicking, Eric called Elena. Something's wrong, he said. The contract info might be bad. That's impossible, Elena insisted. I saw the documents myself. Well, someone's talking to the feds. We need to cover our tracks. Unbeknownst to them, federal investigators were already monitoring these calls, tipped off anonymously about potential securities fraud and the unauthorized sharing of classified information. The morning of the meeting, Brendan prepared meticulously. He dressed in his best suit, positioning a small recording device in his pocket. This would be his only chance. Elena arrived at the restaurant looking immaculate but strained. The weeks of legal battles had taken their toll. You look well, she said coldly as Brendan stood to greet her. Appearances can be deceiving, he replied, gesturing for her to sit. Something we both understand. After ordering drinks, Brendan placed a folder on the table. My settlement offer. Elena scanned the document, her expression hardening. This is insulting. I get the vacation home and a one-time payment. After 8 years. 8 years during which you were planning to take everything, Brendan countered. Or should we discuss the affairs? Eric, the tennis instructor, the ex-boyfriend in Vegas. You bastard, she hissed. You have no proof that would stand up in court. Brendan smiled thinly. I'm not talking about divorce court. I'm talking about federal court. Securities fraud, conspiracy, wire fraud. He slid another document across the table. I've already filed the complaint. The color drained from Elena's face as she read the federal complaint naming her and Eric as defendants. You wouldn't. I already have, Brendan said quietly. The only question is whether you'll be implicated as a co-conspirator or a cooperating witness. As if on cue, Elena's phone rang. Eric, frantic. Federal agents had just left his office with boxes of documents. The trap had snapped shut. The federal investigation moved with surprising speed, fueled by the mountain of evidence Brendan had methodically compiled. Eric Stanton was indicted on multiple counts of securities fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Facing 20 years in federal prison, he quickly sought a deal, offering to testify against anyone involved, including Elena. Elena, confronted with recordings, emails, and Eric's impending testimony, agreed to Russell's original settlement terms: the vacation home in Lake Tahoe, a one-time payment of $500,000, and a complete surrender of any claims to King Engineering or other marital assets. The divorce was finalized 4 months after Brendan discovered her betrayal. Roland Fletcher and 2 other board members resigned after the Securities and Exchange Commission opened inquiries into their communications with Eric Stanton. The Naval Systems Command contract, however, was real, and with the cloud of uncertainty lifting, King Engineering stock rebounded. 6 months after his middle-of-the-night discovery, Brendan sat in his restored corner office, watching Bayview glitter below. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called. Rodney Chambers entered, looking diminished from when Brendan had last seen him at a charity gala over a year ago. "You've got 5 minutes," Brendan said coldly. "I came to appeal to your better nature," Rodney began. "Elena has lost everything. Her reputation, her future. She lost nothing she didn't willingly risk," Brendan interrupted. "She conspired to take everything I built, cheated repeatedly, and leaked confidential information that could have destroyed this company. She's living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Oakland," Rodney persisted, "working as a receptionist. Surely after 8 years of marriage." "After 8 years of lies," Brendan corrected. "The answer is no. She made her choices." After Rodney left, Sophie entered with coffee. "Everything okay?" "Rodney thinks I should show mercy," Brendan said with a wry smile. "And my father always said, mercy is for those who show remorse, not those who got caught." He took the coffee gratefully. "How are the new contracts looking?" "Promising," Sophie said, sitting across from him. Over the months of crisis, their relationship had evolved from professional to something more complex, built on shared battles and unwavering loyalty. The Defense Department audit came back clean. "We're cleared for the guided missile project." Brendan nodded, satisfaction evident. "And Eric? Sentencing next week. His lawyers are pushing for minimum security, but with the Novikov connection, it's unlikely." The intercom buzzed. "Mr. King, there's an Elena Chambers asking to see you." Brendan and Sophie exchanged glances. She'd reverted to her maiden name. "Send her up," Brendan said after a moment. Elena entered, a shadow of her former polished self. Designer clothes replaced by department store basics, premium highlights grown out. "I'll give you privacy," Sophie offered, rising. "No," Brendan said firmly. "Anything she has to say, you can hear." Elena's eyes flickered between them, understanding dawning. "So that's how it is. Your loyal assistant. What do you want, Elena?" Brendan asked, ignoring the jab. "A second chance," she said, her voice breaking. "I've lost everything. My father's company is bankrupt. Eric's going to prison. I'm alone. And that's supposed to move me." Brendan replied evenly. "You plotted my destruction for years, used me, betrayed me with multiple men, conspired to steal my company." "I made terrible mistakes," she admitted, tears flowing now. "But we had good years too. We could again." "No," Brendan cut her off. "We couldn't. I don't hate you anymore, Elena. I feel nothing for you at all." Her face hardened. "You orchestrated all of this. Set us up. Ruined us. I merely ensured you faced the consequences of your own actions," Brendan corrected. "That's justice, not vengeance." After she left, Sophie placed a hand on Brendan's shoulder. "Are you okay?" "I will be," he replied, covering her hand with his own. That night, Brendan returned to his new condo overlooking the bay. The house in Coastal Heights had too many ghosts. A text from Russell flashed on his phone. Eric got 12 years. No parole for at least 8. Brendan poured himself a bourbon and raised it to his father's memory. Trust must be earned. Betrayal is never forgiven. The old man would be proud. 1 year later, the King Engineering corporate retreat at Lake Tahoe brought together employees from all divisions to celebrate the company's most profitable year yet. Under clear blue skies, teams competed in friendly competitions while executives discussed expansion plans. Brendan watched from the deck of the main lodge, formerly his and Alina's vacation home, now company property. The past 18 months had transformed both him and his business. The crucible of betrayal had burned away complacency, forging something stronger. "Penny for your thoughts," Marina said, joining him with a glass of wine. "Just appreciating the view," Brendan replied. "And the peace." "You earned it," his sister said, "though I worried about you for a while there." Brendan nodded. The darkness that had consumed him during those months of plotting had scared them both. "I needed to see it through. Dad would have done the same." Marina acknowledged that with a small smile, though maybe with less finesse. They shared a laugh, remembering their father's more direct approach to problems. Speaking of finesse, Marina nodded toward the beach, where Sophie was organizing a volleyball game. "When are you going to make that official?" Brendan smiled. His relationship with Sophie had evolved gradually over the past year, built on a foundation of shared battles and proven loyalty. "We're taking it slow. No rush." The retreat culminated in a beachside dinner where Brendan announced a company-wide profit-sharing program and expansion into 3 new markets. As employees celebrated, Russell pulled him aside. "Thought you'd want to know." Eric Stanton was denied his appeal. "He'll serve the full 12 years. Brendan nodded, feeling neither joy nor remorse. "And Alina?" "Moved to Phoenix, working in real estate. Seems to be starting over." "Good for her," Brendan said, genuinely meaning it. His need for revenge had been satisfied. Now he wished only to move forward. Later that evening, as the party wound down, Brendan walked along the moonlit shore with Sophie. "Successful weekend," she observed, their hands brushing as they walked. "Very," Brendan agreed, finally taking her hand in his. "The company's stronger than ever." "And its CEO." She teased gently. Brendan considered. Wiser, more cautious about trust, but also more appreciative when it's earned. Sophie stopped, turning to face him. "Is that what I've done? Earned your trust?" "That and more," Brendan admitted, the wall around his heart finally beginning to crumble. "You stood by me at my worst, saw what I was capable of, and didn't run. What you were capable of was protecting what you built," Sophie said firmly. "There's no shame in that." Brendan leaned down and kissed her, gently at first, then with growing confidence. When they parted, both were smiling. "So what now?" Sophie asked. "Now we build something new," Brendan replied. "Together, but with better foundations." As they walked back toward the lodge, Brendan's phone buzzed with a text. He checked it briefly, then switched it off entirely. "Who was that?" Sophie asked. "Nobody important," Brendan said truthfully. The message from Alina's new number would go unanswered. "I still think about what might have been." "Do you ever wonder?" He didn't. The past was settled, its accounts balanced. Justice had been served, cold and complete. Now, finally, Brendan King was ready to look forward, 3 steps ahead of the past that had tried to destroy him. Trust must be earned. Betrayal is never forgiven. But life, he was learning, continued regardless, and with the right people beside you, it could be better than before.